2 of our 30 days journey. Now, in this session, we are just going to focus on building a Docker image. We are going to upload that Docker image to Artifact Registry, and then we are going to basically deploy that image on Cloud Run, right? So what I have here is a simple application, right? So this application, if I were to just open it up in the browser locally, right? So this is just a simple notes application where, I enter some notes. Um, I enter some notes. I can, favorite the notes. I can unfavorite the notes. The notes are stored in my browser, so anytime I kind of refresh, I still have my notes right back. And then I can basically, delete a note, right? So this is just a very simple application that we are just going to deploy to Cloud Run, right? Now, after, of course, you've written your application code and everything, one of the files that you're going to need to create will be a Dockerfile, right? So that Dockerfile would then declare the information about your Docker container, right? So you can see here we are starting from a node application, right? And then we are basically installing our application's dependencies and everything. And then we are trying to use Nginx, which is then going to basically serve our application, right? Now, in order for us to kind of build this application, you would need to have some kind of a container runtime. So in that situation, what we have is Docker, right? You can easily visit, Docker, and easily just look for Docker, and then you can install Docker on your computer, right? So in my case, I've installed Docker on Windows, and so you can basically go ahead to download Docker Desktop. You can download for Mac, Windows, or Linux, and get started there. So once you have Docker on your computer, you would be able to have access to the Docker command line. So in my case, I can just list all of my images with Docker image ls, right, to see if I have any image. Now, I'm going to then try to build this application, right? But before that, I'd like to mention the presence of this file, docker ignore, right? So this is where basically, you might have some files that are inside your code base, but you don't necessarily want those files to be in the final image because you don't need them there, right? So these can be dependencies that you have built locally, right, to allow your application to run. Because in your Docker image, you don't necessarily want to copy those dependencies from your local machine onto the Docker image, but you would normally want to kind of build those dependencies on the Docker image, right? Unless those are dependencies that is kind of like, let's just say maybe you have a logo, maybe you have another file. So those are information that you don't necessarily want to kind of build locally, right? But you just want to have that in the image. So in that case, you can just copy it into the image, right? For things like, maybe images and stuff like that. You might want to maybe just copy it into the image, right? But in this situation, I'm like, okay, I don't need the README inside it, and then I also don't need my node modules, which basically has the packages that I needed to kind of create this application. Because in the Docker image, I ran this command to install the node modules, so there's no need for me to now copy that also, right? This helps you to kind of also reduce the size of your image, right? So we'll go ahead to build the image. So we'll say docker build, and now you need to kind of give it some kind of a tag, right? So this is basically the name that you want to reference the image with, right? So I'll just call it my sample notes, right? And then you just specify where your Docker file is, or the directory where you want to kind of build the image. So I'll just say dot to basically say, okay, this current directory, right? So I'll just kind of run that command. So this will then go ahead to perform the steps and then build the image. Now, if this is the first time you are starting this command, it might take a bit of a longer time because what will happen is that Docker needs to download these base images locally onto your computer, right? So Nginx like this, it needs to download it locally, and then Node server, it needs to also download it locally. So in the end, we can just check Docker image ls, right? So as you can see here, this is my image, right? And then this is the size. So it is about 80.5 megabytes, right? So if I had maybe used, let's just say my whole operating system Windows, or my whole, if I were on Linux, if I was to use maybe my whole operating system Linux, we might be looking at gigs, right? But this is the situation where I'm able to kind of build my application, and now my application is only 80 megabytes in size, right? So in the end, I don't also want to kind of maybe deploy a server that is like maybe 10 gig, right? I don't want to deploy a server that has a disk of like 10 gig because my image is just very small. So that is why Cloud Run is very suitable for this use case, because in the end, my application is just 80 megabytes. So I just want to run that application. I don't want to kind of now rent out servers or worry about, the managing the underlying service that is going to run my application, right? So I just have this very small 80 megabyte application that I want to run, right? Now, we are done with the first step, right? So let's just pick up from the next thing that we can do. I'm trying to, yeah, okay. So the next step that we are going on is we are going to create a repository in Artifact Registry, right? So we are going to basically create a repository in Artifact Registry. Just wanted to move this, but I'm not able to move it, so let's move on. Okay. So we are in Artifact Registry now, right? So Artifact Registry is kind of a place for you to store your Docker images, right? Or you can also store some other images, some other packages, like maybe you've built some package in Go programming language or Node or JavaScript, and you want to share it with other people. This is one of the places that you can do that. So what we are going to do is we are going to basically create a repository that is where we are going to store our image, right? So we're just gonna call this, you can create a single repository and then store a lot of images inside, or you can basically create maybe just a repository per application, but that might not necessarily be the best, right? So you might create maybe one repository and then you use it to store a lot of your applications, right? So in this case, you might store something like, let's just say my apps, right? We might just say my apps for the repository name, and then we just select the region, and you can choose any region that you want to deploy this to. In my case, I'll just go with, let's say, US Central 1, right? And then I can leave all of these as default, and then just go ahead to create the image. So the only thing you just need to worry about is the name and then the region, and you can go ahead to create it. You can create a multi-regional one if you wanted an image that is, let's just say, going to be, if you wanted your repository to be kind of multi-regional, stored in multi-regional locations, right? So US, Europe, or Asia, right? You can do that. So in our case, I'll just go with region and then US Central 1, and I'll go ahead to create the image. The repository, right? So the reason we need this repository is because now even though we have built the image when we did Docker image ls, you can see the image here, but this is local. This is on my computer, right? So unless my computer is what I want to serve my application from, which you can do, but most of the times, I mean, it's not advisable because that means that basically your computer needs to always be running to serve the application, right? Which we don't really want to do that. We want to serve the application on the cloud, right? So we don't want to necessarily always have our computer connected to the internet in order for that to work. So yeah, now we've created a repository. Now, you would have to install, in our situation, you would have to install something like the Google Cloud CLI, right? So the Google Cloud SDK, because basically you need Docker to be able to authenticate with your registry, right? So that you can push images from your local machine, right? There are several methods that you can use. So you can kind of visit this documentation, which I will just attach in the description to the notes for this video, and you can follow the instructions here to kind of set up authentication between Docker and then your registry that you have created, because this is your own registry that you have created, and you need to kind of set up some level of like communication between Docker and then your registry, right? One of the ways is if you basically install the Google Cloud CLI, which I have already done, and then you authenticate with the Google Cloud CLI, right? Then you can go ahead to run a command that I'm going to show next, and that will then connect you to Artifact Registry, right? So that command is basically, once we create that repository, we just go to setup instructions, and then we basically get this instruction right here. So I will just copy, because I'm on Windows. Sometimes this command right here can have issues with that. So I'll just copy that and then just paste that right. So what this is basically saying is that, Google Cloud should set up some kind of a credential locally, right, for Docker, so that I can be able to push images to this, to this repository, right? So I'll just press on enter, and then this is now set up, right? So this has been added to my credentials, right? So this is telling Docker that, hey, if you want to push an image to any if you want to push an image and then the repository is this repository, then use the Google Cloud Command CLI, right? Basically, that is what it's doing. So we are done with that. Now next step next step is so we have connected the repository, right? So we want to create a Docker image, but we've already done that, right? We've already created a Docker image. So the next step is to basically tag our image, or give our image a tag that basically tells it, okay, um, you should point to our new repository, right? Because at the moment, the image that we have created is going to point to the Docker repository, right? So we could still potentially push it, but then this image would then go to Docker Hub, right? It's been a while since I pushed to Docker Hub, so I'm just not sure if this would work, but let me just try anyways. I just want to see something, if this will work. Right. So let me see. Let's see. Last. Oh, let me see. Hmm. Yeah. 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 It's just been a while since I did this. Let me just try to see something. If we are able to do that, then we can try to push an image quickly to, yeah. Um. Yeah. We can try to push an image quickly. Uh. Let's see. Okay. And then let me try to push that. Would that work? Okay, yeah, that works. Okay, 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 okay. Yeah. So by default, right, we would have pushed to, I will just explain what I did there. By default, we would have pushed the image to basically Docker Hub, right? So that is what you would have done. So let me just refresh this page to see if the image shows up. Right, so you can see the images right here, right? So this is basically my Docker registry, right? But this is on Docker Hub, right? So with that, once you kind of have installed Docker, you just do Docker login, right? And then if you don't already have an account on Docker Hub, you can create one. It's free, and then you can push images there, right? So this image, as it stands, I can still deploy it to Google Cloud, run, and it will work, right? But I'm trying to just kind of guide us to use Artifact Registry so that we would understand how that also works. So we will just focus on that. But this is one way you can go about it, right? So the first command I did here was to just basically take my image and give it a tag that basically says that, okay, so this is going to also point to the same image. That is what basically the tag is. So if I just do docker image ls, you should see here that, okay, I have my sample notes, but then I also have another, image, right, which is also pointing to the same image ID. So you see this, the image ID of my new repository is the same as the image ID of the image that we just built, right? So it's more or less trying to say that, okay, point or create a new registry or create a new repository so that when I'm pushing the image, I can basically push this image, right? So unless maybe I have access to, let's say, the docker.io repository itself, then I can directly push this image, but I don't have access to it. And so what I have access to is my repository, which is Lance 1997. So I can just, go ahead to add my image under that repository, right? So that is similar thing that we are going to do with Google Cloud Artifact Registry. So we are going to tag our image, right? So we are going to tag our image. So in this case, um, we are going to tag the local image with a repository name. So we basically have, the local image being my sample notes, right? Now we have to also edit our location. So in our location, what we selected was US Central 1, right? So we select US Central 1. And then here you will have your project ID, right? So in this case, or in my case, if I just come back here, and then check this out. This is my project ID, right? So Omni deploy run, right? So that is my project ID. So I will just be using that. Sorry. Yeah. So I'll just be using my project ID, and then also this would then be the repository, right? Let me see. So yeah. Let's see. So what did I think I named it my apps, right? I named it my apps, right? So the repository, and then what is the image that should be there, and then you give it some tag. So this, in the case, this is the latest that I want, right? So it is kind of similar to what I did with the Docker one, right? So you can see here when I did the Docker tag, I just wrote my registry name, right? Or my repository name, and then the name of the image, right? So my repository name slash the name of the image. So a similar thing here, Docker tag the image, and then this is just the full repository name, right? And then slash the image, right? So we will just copy that command. We'll just copy that command. Um, Fingers crossed, everything works, right? So we have tagged that image, right? And so the next thing is to push that image then to Artifact Registry, right? So we will go ahead to then come to this section where we can now push the image, right? So if I try docker image ls, I should then see the new tag. So you see the new tag here. So US Central 1 dash docker.pkg.dev slash the project ID slash the repository name slash the image name. So this is now the new tag that I've created. So I can now push this new tag, right? So what I can do is either copy the command from here, or I can also just copy this. I can also just copy this, right? And then just do docker push, right? So this should then, hopefully if I set up everything well, this should then work and it should push my image to the remote repository that I created. Let's see. Um, let's see. Let's try that again. Okay. So let's do docker image ls. Let's see. Uh, let me check my image once more to be sure. My repository. So the repository is called my apps, right? The repository is called my apps, right? So let's look at it. So let me just copy this. Let me just paste this here just to see. So US Central 1 dash docker.pkg.dev slash omnirun slash my apps. So that is accurate, right? So that is accurate. Let us create the, let us remove the image, right? Let us remove the image and create it again. So docker rmi, I'm just going to remove that image, right? Because always, if something goes wrong, you can just restart the whole process. Docker image ls, and then let's see. Let me just docker build this again, right? My sample. Let me just run the build again, right? Just to be sure, let's just run this build again. Let's just run this build again. So the build is done, right? So docker image ls, right? So the build is done. My sample nodes, we still have it, and then let's do another tag, right? So let's do another tag. So docker tag my sample nodes, right? Let me see what I copied here. US Central 1 docker.pkg.dev. Let me remove the latest tag and see something. My app slash my sample nodes, right? So let's see. Yeah, so we've done the tag. So docker image ls again, and then let's see. So we do have the image right here, right? So this is pointing to the same image ID, right? Now let's try the docker push once more, right? I'm thinking that perhaps I've made a mistake in connecting the registry. Um, let's see. Let me refresh. Okay, 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 okay. Let's see. Okay. So let's just try sending this to AI to see what we get. So um, just not sure. I've never faced this error before, right? This is the first time I'm facing this error. So that's what I'm thinking, that probably I've just messed up the tagging of the image, right? That's what I'm thinking, that I've messed up the tagging of the image. Uh, huh. Yeah, yeah. Hmm. Let me do this jcloud of configure. Let me configure the. Let me try to find that command. Let me configure this again because I have configured this. I have configured the connection to US Central 1. So what could be? Okay, let's try. Docker pool. Hello world. Right. Um, right. So let's just pull the default Docker image, and then let me see something. I just want to try pushing the hello world application and then see if that works. Right. So let me just copy this. Right. Docker image ls. Docker tag hello world slash hello world. Right. Docker image ls. Right. So we now should have a tag to hello world image. Right. And so I can then try to do a Docker push for the hello world image. Uh, let's see. Yeah, we're getting the same error. US Central 1. Let's see. I'm just not sure because the image name is accurate, right? So let's just see. Let's see. US Central 1 dash docker.pkg.dev slash the project omni deploy run slash my apps slash let me see. I think uh no, okay, no, that is fine. What could be the problem? Hmm, hmm. Okay, 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 because I have tagged a new image, but I'm still getting that same error. jcloud of configure docker push. So this is my full push command. This should be fine because this is the full push command for the repository. My apps in the US Central 1 region. Okay. Uh, for the hello world image. Let me see something. This is very weird. Let me see something here. Uh, Something came to mind, but I just missed that. Right. Okay. So let's see. Let's see. Yeah. So I did this connection. I have done the tag. Right. This is the repository, and yeah, this is strange. Okay, let me try the command from here. I think that is the command that I tried, yeah. I'm just not sure. This is strange. Huh. Okay, let's do this. Let's go over to see if there's any steps that I've missed, right? So the location is US Central 1, right? This is the project ID, this is the repository, and then let's see, let's come to repositories, my apps. I see, I see what that issue is. Uh, this, this, this is the issue. Yeah, that is, that was the issue. So let me just close that. Oh my. So that was the issue. But this is good. This is good debugging. That was the issue. Yeah. So let us Docker image ls. Right. I'll just remove the image that I tagged here. Right. So I'll just remove this and then Docker, I think Docker my. Let's do that. The hello world image, I think it's like just a few kilobytes, so I'll just leave it there. It's fine. But let me just remove the tag because this is then it serves no purpose. So Docker my, right. So we want tagged that too. So Docker image ls, right. And then let's just try to let's look for the hello world. Let's just try to do the hello world and push the hello world image and see if that works, right? So we are tagging the hello world image once more, and then we are going to go ahead to Docker push that hello world image just to see how if it works, just to see if it works, right? Okay. Not all is present. That is fine. So let's see. Let's come back and then let's refresh. Yeah, we have the hello world image here, so that means that it's working. So that was a good debugging session, but yeah, that was the error that we were facing. So let's just now try to let me search for that command that tags the application. Yeah, so docker tag my sample nodes, and then let's fix the region. So it's US Central. I was thinking of AWS, that is why I think I just messed it up. So Docker image ls, and then we should see our image right here, right? And then we can try, so Docker push. This should then work. Right. Okay. So if we refresh, we should now have our image pushed right here, right? So we have my sample nodes right here, right? So the image has been pushed to our remote repository, right? So we can now go ahead to deploy the application, right? We also did push the image to our our docker.io remote repository, so we can also launch the image from here, right? So any of them would work. We would just stick to Artifact Registry, right? So we'll go ahead to look for Cloud Run. We'll right click and open that. And then what we'll go ahead to say, now you can't connect you can't connect it to a repository. So what this would do is it will use the GitHub. It will use it will use Google Cloud Build, right, to basically build your images, right? So you can do it when, let's just say, you update your repository, your GitHub repository with a new code, maybe to your main branch or to your dev branch, then you can go ahead to deploy a new Cloud Run service. So in our case, we just go ahead to click on deploy container, and then we want to deploy one revision from an existing image. So the container URL is where you can go ahead to select your container URL. So we can select our own container. I want to see if we were to try docker.io slash or docker.io slash lance 1997 slash sample dash notes. Right, because this is what we have on docker.io, right? So my sample notes, sorry. Let me just do this. I think we should be able to just, we should be able to just, yeah, should be able to just do something like that. So, right. So you can specify the image that we built on Docker and the image that we pushed to Docker.io, right? And then you can basically build from there, right? But we want to just, stick to what we have. So we'll come over here and then we'll see our image. So we can then select it and then we can say, okay, we want to use the latest one, right? So we say latest and then we select that. And we will then configure the name for the service. So this is automatically kind of picking it up from the image's name, but you can change it to any name that you want. And then we select a suitable region. Since my repository is in, US Central 1, I would just deploy my application US Central 1, but they don't really have any relationship, right? Because it may be, even if it will affect you at all, maybe the build time, right? Because it now has to, let's say, if your application is in, London, and now has to pull the image from maybe US, but that shouldn't even be a problem at all. So don't really worry about, the region where your repository is compared to where your Cloud Run service is, because your Cloud Run service should be closer to your users, right? Your repository could be maybe in a different place for some compliance reason, but your service itself could be more closer to the users, right? So to maybe let's just say to demonstrate that I've never deployed to Johannesburg, I'm just not sure. So I would just go ahead to select some other region. So let's just go ahead with, let's just say Mumbai or something like that. And then we will just go ahead to say, okay, we want to allow public access, right? Because you can also require IAM authentication. So what this will mean is that if someone wants to connect to your service, they will need to provide some Google Cloud credentials, IAM credentials, or some Google Cloud identity credentials in order to access it. But we just want to keep it simple. So my sample nodes, we go ahead to select our region. We go ahead to select, that we want to allow public access. Now there are more options here, which we will later on explore. So we will just skip over them, right? And then we can also choose, some other options. So the port that the container is running on, we can skip that. For now, we will just stick with the default, 512 megabytes memory, and then also one CPU, and that should be good enough, right? But you can increase that if you wanted based on your application requirements, because let's just say if your application does more memory or CPU intensive tasks, then you might want to do that. Our application is just very simple. It is only going to run inside the browser because the nodes are saved in your browser. So there isn't any operation that needs to happen on the server itself. The server just needs to return that HTML or that page, and then everything else will happen inside the browser. So we don't do a lot of processing on the server, so it is fine to go with 512 memory. If I could go less, like 256, we could try that just to see, but that will mostly be it, right? So the main thing is if you want to simply deploy, you specify your container image, you give it a name and a region, you allow public access if you want to have a public URL that you can share with anybody, and then you go ahead to kind of create, right? That is the most basic steps, right? There are more options which we will explore in time. So we'll go ahead to create this. Right. So this should then, create a new Cloud Run revision, right? So basically, once you create your Cloud Run service, what Cloud Run does is it basically creates what you call revisions. So the revisions is kind of like a version of your application. So this then allows you to do some interesting things later on, whereby you can switch between revisions. So let's just say maybe I deploy the application right now, and then let's just say I make a change to the notes. Maybe I add a feature for you to be able to search through the notes, right? So after I add that feature, I can then build a new image, push it, right? And then come over here, click on edit and deploy a new version. And then I can specify the new image, right? I can specify the new image and then go ahead to deploy it. That will then create a new revision, right? So what that gives me, the advantage that gives me is that if later on, let's just say I realize that, oh, the new version, maybe it is having bugs or there are issues with the new version, then I can just go ahead to basically, go roll back to the previous version, right? So we'll just do that very simple thing, kind of just to illustrate, right? We'll just do that something very simple just to illustrate. So I'll just commit these changes to say setup Docker, right? I'll just say setup Docker and then go ahead to let's just say just on the home page, right? We will just go ahead to just make something simple, right? So capture your notes and ideas, right? Uh, all your data is stored in the browser. So let's just say this is the new change that we want to make to the application, right? We will now need to build the image again. So we then do, sorry, let me just do a clear. We will then do a docker build dash t my sample notes dot, right? So we then build a new image, right? Which will then kind of take your new changes and then build the application again, right? Let's just see how this process is going. So it's still taking a bit of time. I'm thinking it could also be, sometimes it could also be due to the port that is just not working. Oh, or there's a problem with the build itself. You can sometimes also check the build logs, but let's wait for a while and see something. There'll probably be no logs here. The logs will probably be on cloud build or something like that. Yeah, I'm thinking the routing of the traffic is what is causing the issue. So let's see. Let's wait. I'm thinking the routing of the traffic. So build. Let's just check our cloud build to see how things are going. That's what I'm thinking, cloud build, and then we check the history. We should see, okay, so that is not showing up in the history here. Let's just see. So let it just complete. It will probably give us some logs that we can check out to see why maybe the build, I think the build is failing. Yeah, it is not able to reach the port 8080. So let's see. Yeah, it's not able to reach the port 8080. Nginx default port. Uh, okay, okay. Nginx, Nginx Docker specify port. Let's see that. Hmm, mm, let's see. Let's try to run the image locally and see something. So Docker run my sample notes, right? So we say 8080 C.2 port 80. Uh, ah, Docker run. Yeah. So we will try to run that. We will try to run the image locally and then see. Let's see. So let's then try localhost 8080. Okay, yeah. So it should be working and it should be running, right? Because we're able to connect to it. So and then I'll just docker stop dash df52. So I'm just stopping the container that we just started. Docker stop. Okay, docker ps. Okay, so let's just see. So we do have 8080. The port on the container though is port 80, right? And I'm not exactly sure if we can specify port 80, you know. Let's try again and see something. Let's try again. Let's try port 80. I'm just not sure exactly. Let's try port 80 and see. Uh, okay, okay. So if you try port 80, that works. Okay, so let's then visit our application. So let's go ahead to save. Let's visit our application and see if it worked, right? So the application works, right? I also made it a PWA, so you can simply just install it on your PC, right? And you should be able to just use it or use it as if it is an application by just installing it. So as an example, so once you install it, it now becomes as if an application on your Windows computer. So you should probably see a shortcut to it on your desktop, right? But it's still the web application, right? PWA is something very nice to use. So I can then still save the notes to it, like hello world, you know, and then I can, let's say go to the market, right? And then I can unlike and stuff like that. So then let me refresh this. Right. So yeah, as to what I said about the revisions, now we have built the new image, right? We did that, I think, just here. We built the new image, which should have this change right here, right? So we would then do a new tag, right? So we would then basically create a new tag. So Docker tag, so we'll tag the image again, right, with our own repository, right? And then we'll go ahead to push that image again, right? So I'm just trying to go through the previous commands we've already run so that I don't have to write the commands once more. So docker push, so this should then push the image to our repository. So if we were to come to our repository and then we just do a refresh, we go back into my sample notes, we should see that the number of images have increased, right? So now we have a new one right here. Right. So we can go ahead to edit our revision, right? And then we can go ahead to select the new image, right? So my sample, and then we select the new one. We say select, and then we just say deploy, right? So this is going to go ahead to then deploy our application with the new revision, right? So I will just visit this in the browser just so instead of having it there, just so we can just see the URL and everything. Right. So we now have a new revision. So if we refresh the page, let's see either uh, either my image did not work at all. Let's see. Yeah, okay. So it just the page was just not refreshing. It was probably using whatever was inside the cache. So I've just refreshed the page, and so now you can see we now have the new change here, right? So you can do some interesting things, which I'll just mention here, is you can also do something like manage the traffic, right? So by default, once you deploy a new revision, it is set to the latest. So all traffic is sent to it. But what you can do is you can, go to a revision and then basically kind of just click on manage traffic here and then just say, serve, let's just say this is the one that I think if I look at the time, this is the one that I did first, right? And then I can just say serve 100% traffic to it, right? So this would then basically point back to the old revision that we basically built, right? So you are saying, okay, no, I don't want to use this new one. Maybe I don't like what I've written here. So I want to go back to the previous one and I can just refresh. And now I see that, I have the previous one, right? You can do some interesting things like, for instance, you could say, so the latest one should have maybe, let's say 50% of the traffic. And then let's just say the first one I created should also have 50% of the traffic. So anytime someone visits, there's a 50-50 probability that they will get the old one or the new one, right? Maybe we can increase this one to, let's decrease this one to 10%. So the probability that they will get the latest one will be 10%, and then the probability they will get the other one will be 90%, right? This might hurt us because now we have to probably refresh the page a couple of times to make sure that, we can get either of them. So let's just try and see if we will get either of them. So we are getting the initial one, initial one. It's like 10% of the, is 90% or is it 10%, right? So the initial one is, I think the initial one is like 90% of the time, and then the current one is 10% of the time. So we might get it, we might not get it. I should have increased the percentage. I mean, okay, so we've gotten it. Okay, yeah. So you kind of are able to get it, 10% of the time. So someone might visit and get it, someone might visit and not get it. So that is just something very interesting. We will talk about that in time. But basically, this is just, I know it's been a long session because we had to do some debugging, but hopefully you found that useful. And yeah. So the steps that I mentioned here are literally what we did, except those debugging steps. But you create a Docker file, you create some repository in Artifact Registry. You can also use Docker.io if you do not want to go into Artifact Registry. But then I feel like Artifact Registry is almost free when you come to Google Cloud, and so we will kind of look at that in time. But if you look at it, so Artifact Registry pricing. Right. If we look at Artifact Registry pricing, it is not really that expensive, so you can use it to kind of, keep your image. So the storage you get, up to 0.5 gigs, so that means 500 megabytes. In this case, my image that I pushed was around 80 megabytes, so I still fall within, the free tier, right? So, data transfer, into Google Cloud is also free. So that means when you are pushing some image or something like that, and there are some that maybe typically will be having some charges, right? But as you can see, it is relatively cheaper. But you can explore the pricing more to kind of see if you want to use it or not, right? But you can still use your docker.io and have the image right there. So you do have your artifact registry. You create one if you already don't have, a repository. If not, you follow the instructions to kind of create a new one. to use to use what you already have, and then you can also connect the repository locally, right? And then you can go ahead to create a Docker image, right, with your Docker file, of course. You tag that image with your new, Artifact Registry connection, and then you go ahead to push that image, and then you deploy the image on Cloud Run. So this service should now be available on Cloud Run. And because I made a PWA, I've now installed it as an application. So anytime I want, I can just come to my desktop and click on it, and I should be able to visit or get the application. Right. I'm not sure why this is having this issue. Let me see something. Let's see. Yeah, okay. Okay. Let me just try it again. Okay, okay. Yeah. So, and I have the application locally if I wanted, but this is not more or less something with Cloud Run. This has to do with just how you kind of process or create your application, right? So I think that should be all. Thank you for joining, and then catch you on day 3, right?